He wasn't just a performer, he lived and breathed country music. With his overalls, fast banjo playing, and big laugh, Grandpa Jones wasn't just a performer, he was an American hero. Grandpa Jones was the heart of rural theater. He went from being poor in Kentucky to becoming a beloved star on Hee Haw. But behind his friendly and upbeat personality was a man who had been through a lot of pain, suspicion, and kept secrets his whole life. The night in 1973 when he found his close friend String Bean Ackerman's dead body in his Tennessee home was the most haunting. Ackerman had been killed in cold blood. Grandpa was never the same after that night. His fame would last for years afterward, but something heavy hung over him when they were not together. He became less social and more careful, so when Grandpa Jones died suddenly, many people thought it was normal. There have been stories about his death for years though that he knew things that he was afraid to share. Now, shockingly, long sealed papers, journals and recordings that have never been heard before have come to light, pointing to a scary possibility. Grandpa Jones may not have just found a murder, he may have found something much bigger that someone wanted to keep hidden. Now there is silence again, the puzzle is solved and the truth that will be shown at the end of this video is much darker than anyone thought. Lewis Marshall Jones, Grandpa Jones's father, was born in 1913 and grew up in the rough Middlelands of Kentucky, and then Ohio. Old-time fiddle tunes played on front porches and dirty radios when he was a boy made him love mountain music early on. At first his stage name, Grandpa, was just a joke about how grumpy he was in the morning, but it stuck. As fate would have it, that name became a brand, a legacy, and an important part of American theater. By the 1940s, Jones was well known on the radio, where he performed with the Browns Ferry Four and often on the Grand Ole Opry. People loved his wit, his down-to-earth honesty, and how he could go from making jokes to singing sad songs about heartbreak without missing a beat. Over time, Grandpa Jones became one of the most liked acts on the Opry because he could always be counted on and was always himself. By the 1960s he was very famous thanks to TV, especially Hee Haw, where millions of people saw his silly charm and singing skills every week. He was the funny old man in bib overalls with a twinkle in his eye when he was caught on camera. Behind the scenes, things were more complicated though. Jones was known for being very protective of his family and image. He was very careful with his private life, and for good reason. The early 1970s were a time of rapid change in his world. There were more businesses, corporations and fights in Nashville's music scene. Smoother music was taking the place of good old country ballads and church harmonies. More sounds that work well on the radio. A few old stars were quietly pushed out, and others went away. But what about Grandpa Jones? He wasn't going to give up. That made some people angry with him. There was already a tragedy in his life because of his close friendship with David Stringbean Ackerman, another country music star. Jones found Stringbean and his wife dead in their home in 1973. It was such a horrible scene that it scarred Jones for life. Not many people knew that Jones had doubts about what his friend's death really meant. Insiders knew there was more to that story than what was told to them. Stringbean had been worried about something in the weeks before he died, but Grandpa never said anything more in public. He wouldn't or couldn't. Jones became less talkative and more distant over the next few years. People who knew him well said that he began writing in full and personal journals, including memories, thoughts, and what he called the real stories behind what they want you to believe. How about those journals? What's going to happen next will depend on them because they were gone after he died. Up until now, Grandpa Jones stayed a well-known TV character in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Even though not as many people noticed, Ann was making him feel bad at that time. Even though he kept giving great acts on Hee Haw, something had changed behind the scenes. Others at work said that Jones seemed more anxious. Before he settled into a hotel room, he often checked it out. He also went with private security and stopped answering his home phone without a special code word. Some thought it was because they were old or had been traumatized by finding Stringbean's body years before, but others thought it was more serious. It looked like Grandpa Jones was scared. There were stories going around in Nashville at the time about a so-called blacklist of older stars who were no longer useful to the business. These weren't just jobs that were ending. There were rumors that some people were being told to leave. Take a break and move on. Jones stood out in that setting. He wouldn't quit because he still had a lot of loyal fans. He didn't drink, do drugs or try to become famous. He stubbornly stayed on the ground. But Grandpa Jones had already begun making plans behind closed doors. Over time, close family members remembered that he had started to scan old letters, record spoken memories on tape recorders, and hide papers in what he called his gospel box, a big wood chest that used to hold his collection of religious music. But that chest and his papers would be gone a week after he died. Then 1998 came along. In February of that year, Grandpa Jones had 2 strokes. One of them was said to have been quick and hard to explain. He had just come back from filming, and according to his wife Ramona, was feeling good when he passed out. He was in a Nashville hospital for a few days before he died on February 19, 1998. On paper, it was blamed on problems that came up after the strokes. No tests were asked for, and his funeral was quick, quiet, and without a lot of fuss. But a different story was being told behind closed doors. An old family friend who just now spoke out said that Grandpa Jones had planned to tell the public about some things that happened to Stringbean and what was still going on in the Nashville music business in the days before he had his stroke. He is said to have told this friend, "The box is gone." People looked through his house, his personal things were looked through, the wood chest is nowhere to be found, and neither were his written or recorded diaries. Some people thought it might have just been moved. Some people said in whispers that someone else did it first. No matter what the truth was, one thing was clear. At the very moment it would have mattered most, something Grandpa Jones had held on to for decades had disappeared, and the puzzle about him was just starting to come together. People openly mourned Grandpa Jones's death, but his legacy was quietly taken care of behind the scenes. It was clear that he made a difference in country music. He had created the genre, kept its roots alive, and used humor and heart to connect it to a whole generation of Americans. But as his family got ready to take care of his estate, strange contradictions started to show up. At first some details seemed unimportant, but they quickly brought up important questions about what had really happened in his last years. The first red flag had to do with money. Even though Grandpa Jones had been traveling, making albums and appearing on TV for decades, his estate was surprisingly small. People had heard of this man for almost 50 years, but his bank accounts and stated assets were much lower than what was expected. It was said that his wife Ramona, who was also a well-known singer, had trouble finding some royalty streams and residual checks that should have been coming in. There were no statements and the accounts were frozen. One accountant said that important papers had been shredded by accident. It then came to the missing things. After the now famous gospel box, many of Grandpa Jones's personal belongings were lost. He gave them letters he wrote to Stringbean in the years before he died, as well as signed contracts, rare Opry souvenirs and most worryingly, tapes he made in the 1990s talking about dirty secrets in the country music business. These were not just odd things to collect. It was clear that Grandpa had been putting them together for years. At first Ramona thought it was because of bad management or just being lost, but family members weren't sure. After the fact, one of Grandpa's sons said that Jones had been worried about an unknown person watching the house in the weeks before the stroke. Even better, neighbors said they had seen a black SUV stopped across the street for several nights in a row, with its windows tinted and its license plate hidden. Over the next few years, the story of Grandpa Jones's death slowly disappeared from public conversation. At the time there wasn't any big scandal or dramatic turn, so most people thought it was just the death of an old legend. Some people in Nashville never stopped talking though. A reporter from a small Tennessee newspaper who was writing an article about Grandpa's life found a storage unit that was registered in 2011 under a fake name. There were 2 audio tapes inside, tucked between some dusty instruments and old show posters. Her breath caught when she played them because the voice on the tapes was so clear. It was Grandpa Jones. He wasn't singing or thinking about the past, he was telling them. He talked about how bad things are in the country music business, including betrayals, being shut down, and what really happened the night Stringbean was killed. He also gave hints that he thought the same people were also watching him. It was the first real sign in more than 10 years that Grandpa Jones knew about something big and risky. The secret of his quiet death might finally start to come to light if those tapes are real. The tapes that were found in that Tennessee storage unit were more than just old dusty records. They were the clues to a story that was much scarier than anyone thought it would be.